The road out of Kandahar at 3:47 in the morning looked like the surface of a dead planet. Flat. Broken. Pale under the quarter moon. The kind of darkness that swallows headlights and spits back only shadows. Marcus Teller sat behind the wheel of the lead MRAP and said nothing. He had not said much in 6 weeks. The other drivers had noticed this and filed it away under the general category of things about Marcus that didn't quite add up. He drove like someone who had done this before. Not the convoy driving. Something else. Something with more teeth. The mission brief had been straightforward. 4 vehicles. Route Vermont north out of Kandahar Airfield toward a forward operating base called Wolverine. 41 kilometers up a road that wanted you dead every time you used it. Supply run. Water, ammunition, MRAs, replacement parts for a generator that had been coughing for 2 weeks. Standard logistics, the kind of run nobody wrote articles about. Marcus checked his mirrors. MRAP-2 sat 60 meters back, right where it should be. He adjusted his grip on the wheel with his left hand, kept the right near the radio. The road surface changed texture about 200 meters ahead. Near an overpass abutment the intelligence officer had flagged in the previous week's report. Someone had been digging around the shoulders. Couldn't confirm IED placement. Couldn't confirm it wasn't. He slowed by 4 kilometers per hour. Nobody in the cab noticed. His gunner, a specialist named Doucette, was scanning the rooftops through the turret. Good kid. Worked hard. Hadn't figured out yet that the convoy driver he was riding with was reading the road like a man who had helped design the curriculum for reading roads. The flag was a piece of yellow plastic, barely visible, stuck in the dirt 40 meters left of the road. Marcus saw it. He clocked the disturbed earth 12 meters further on. He clocked the culvert under the road surface. He clocked the angle of approach, the blast radius if the charge was what he suspected, the position of Vehicle 2 behind him. He keyed the radio and told Vehicle 2 to increase interval to 90 meters and hold that spacing for the next 400 meters. The driver, a corporal named Estevez, asked why. Marcus said there might be something on the shoulder and he wanted buffer. That was all. Estevez gave him 90 meters. Marcus drove through the kill zone at precisely the speed he'd been going. He exhaled once. He noted the slight discoloration of the road surface at the 11 o'clock position, 18 centimeters to the left of his left front tire's projected path. He drove past it. He did not touch the brakes. Braking created visible brake light signatures, and if someone was watching the road with a trigger in his hand, Marcus did not want to give them a reason to act before he was clear. He was clear. He did not announce this over the radio. He drove. Nobody in the convoy knew they had just threaded a needle. Nobody knew the driver in Vehicle 1 had assessed a probable pressure plate, IED, calculated the standoff needed to survive a partial detonation if he was wrong about the exact placement, positioned himself inside the dead zone where the device's shaped charge would pass over rather than through the vehicle's floor, and executed a textbook counter, IED, driving technique used almost exclusively by personnel who had received training that convoy drivers did not receive. Nobody knew yet. That was the thing about Marcus Teller. The truth would come out in 11 days, on a Wednesday, when the road gave up its secret and everything changed. 3 months before the convoy run that nobody would forget, Marcus arrived at Kandahar Airfield on a Tuesday in late February carrying a single duffel bag and a contractor's badge that identified him as a logistics support specialist attached to a transportation unit out of Fort Campbell. He was 34 years old. He had a slight tan line that ended high on his neck where a collar would sit, suggesting the kind of outdoor life that office workers didn't have. His hands were thick. His eyes moved in the particular way that certain people's eyes move when they've spent years in rooms and places where the wrong thing in the wrong spot gets people killed. He checked in with the unit sergeant major, a heavyset man named Bautista, who had done 3 tours in Iraq and considered civilian contractors somewhere below necessary and above inconvenient on the hierarchy of things he had to manage. Bautista looked at Marcus's paperwork, looked at Marcus, looked at the paperwork again. He asked where Marcus had learned to drive. Marcus said he'd been doing it a while. Bautista assigned him to vehicle 1 of the Tuesday-Thursday rotation and told him the briefings were at 0200 and to not be late. Marcus was never late. In 6 weeks, he was never late, never absent, never the source of a complaint, and never the subject of a story good enough to tell. He was the civilian contractor who drove the lead vehicle and kept to himself and ate alone and did a physical training routine every morning at 0430 that the soldiers who happened to see it described to each other in tones that started as mocking and ended as something else. One of them, a young private named Alvarado, had gotten up early to use the bathroom and seen Marcus doing pull-ups on a bar outside the motor pool. Not the quick kind, the slow kind, the kind where you hold at the top for a count and descend with complete control and show no sign of effort and just keep going past 20, past 25, past 30 without changing your face. Alvarado told this to Doucette. Doucette filed it away. Marcus Teller had grown up in Beaumont, Texas, in a house 3 blocks from a chemical plant that burned orange at night and smelled like sulfur and ambition. His father had worked the refineries for 22 years, and his mother had worked a school cafeteria, and his older sister had gotten a scholarship to Rice University and became a civil engineer, and he had become something else entirely. He enlisted in the Navy at 17 with parental signature, which his father gave him without hesitation, because the man had served in the First Gulf War aboard a destroyer and believed that certain things were passed down the same way hair color was passed down, not through choice, but through blood. Marcus went to boot camp in Great Lakes in November, which is the kind of November that people in places with mild winters never understand. Wind off the lake like a punishment, cold that had opinions. He was a good sailor before he was a great one. He qualified expert on every weapon system they put in front of him. He did what he was told. He ran when they ran and lifted when they lifted and sat in the lectures and absorbed the information with the quiet intensity of someone taking notes in a language they intended to master. He was not the loudest man in any room. He was often the last person you'd pick in a lineup if you were picking for who had done what he'd done. BUD/S selection in Coronado came after 4 years of service and a recommendation from a master chief who wrote in the margin of the evaluation that Marcus Teller was the kind of man who got quieter when things got worse, and that this was a quality worth paying attention to. He passed Hell Week on his first attempt. He did not quit during the long paddle runs or the cold water immersions or the timed runs in the sand. He did not quit when the instructors singled him out in ways that were designed to identify the point at which a man's will became negotiable. His will did not become negotiable. He graduated BUD/S Class 253 and reported to SEAL Team 8 at Little Creek, Virginia, where he spent the next 11 years doing work that his family was not fully briefed on, and his friends from Beaumont would not have recognized as the life of a person they had once known. He deployed to Iraq twice and Afghanistan 4 times, and to 3 other places whose names would not appear in this account because the missions associated with those places were still in categories that didn't get discussed at dinner tables or in parking lots or anywhere else comfortable. He was promoted. He was good at his job in the way that certain professionals are good at their jobs, where the competence becomes invisible because it never fails, and what never fails stops being noticed. He wore a bracelet on his left wrist, titanium, thin, the kind that looked like it cost $20 at a gas station and meant considerably more than that. His team sergeant had handed it to him after the operation in Helmand Province in 2013 that ended badly in the way that some operations ended badly, where all the planning and all the training and all the right decisions still resulted in 2 good men not coming home. The bracelet had both their names laser-etched on the inside face, where only Marcus could read them. He ran his thumb across the inside surface sometimes when the quiet got too loud. On the road, in the vehicle, in the hour before a run when the coffee tasted like diesel and old decisions. He had left the teams in 2019, not dramatically, not with the kind of injury or disgrace that made for clean narrative. He had served his time and done his work, and one morning he had sat in a parking lot in Virginia Beach and understood that he had been running toward something for 15 years. And the thing he'd been running toward had turned out to be something he was still trying to name. He took his separation paperwork and his back pay and his veteran status, and did not know for 8 months what to do with any of it. The contractor job came through a former operator he'd known from a joint task force rotation, a man who ran a small security consulting firm that placed former special operations personnel in support roles where their skills were useful and their presence was not advertised. The firm specialized in making former operators invisible in plain sight. Marcus was good at that already. He had been driving convoys out of Kandahar for 6 weeks when Doucette asked him directly. They were sitting in the motor pool at 02:15, 2 hours before the Thursday run, and Doucette was cleaning his M4A1 with the kind of focus that young soldiers brought to tasks when they were actually thinking about something else. He asked Marcus where he'd served. Marcus said he'd been around. Doucette pushed a little. He said the way Marcus called out road anomalies over the radio was not the way civilian drivers called out road anomalies. Marcus said he paid attention. Doucette let it go. He didn't want to push too hard. There was something about Marcus that suggested certain doors were closed, not because of rudeness, but because of weight. The way a door to a room carrying something heavy was harder to open, not from lock, but from pressure. Marcus appreciated that Doucette let it go. The bracelet sat on his left wrist where it always sat, cool in the morning air, the names facing inward. Staff Sergeant Olmos was the convoy commander on the run that changed everything. She had been in the army for 9 years, MP turned logistics, sharp in the tactical sense and sharper in the administrative sense, which was the sense that actually kept convoys running on time and with the right parts going to the right places. She did not particularly trust Marcus. She did not distrust him either. She had assessed him in the way she assessed all the civilians who rotated through her unit, professionally, with appropriate skepticism, and without the time to go deeper than what the paperwork said. The paperwork said logistics support. The paperwork said 6 years driving in hostile environments. The paperwork said references available on request. She had not requested them. She probably would have eventually. Some of her soldiers were starting to talk. Alvarado had told her about the pull-ups. Doucette had mentioned the road reading. A driver named Park had watched Marcus strip and reassemble an M9 in the equipment shed one afternoon and reported back that the man had done it in darkness, by feel, with the kind of speed that wasn't about showing off. Olmos filed these reports in her head and decided she would make a call to the contracting office the following week. She did not have to wait that long. The 11 days passed, the way days in Kandahar passed, during a relatively quiet stretch. Not quiet in the absolute sense. Quiet in the sense that the threats were manageable and the missions went off on schedule and nobody got hurt badly enough to change the rotation. There were 2 incidents of small arms fire on Route Vermont, both at range and neither on Marcus's convoy. There was an IED strike south of Wolverine that hit a civilian vehicle and reminded everyone that the road didn't take days off. Marcus drove. He called out anomalies. He ran his thumb across the bracelet in the hour before each mission and put the past back in its drawer and focused on the present tense, where everything that mattered was happening. On the Tuesday before it happened, he noticed a change in the road surface near the checkpoint at kilometer 19. 3 different spots within a 40-meter stretch that showed signs of disturbance. Not fresh disturbance. A week old, maybe more. But the pattern was wrong. The pattern was the kind of thing that a person who had spent years studying patterns in roads in hostile environments would recognize, not as a single IED, but as a system. 3 devices. Spaced for a convoy, the first to initiate, the second to catch the reaction force, the third positioned for the vehicles pulling over to assist. It was called a complex ambush setup. It was the kind of thing that ended convoys. He reported it. He reported it to Olmos in precise language that was not the language of a man who drove trucks for a living. She looked at him. He told her the locations. He gave her the approximate spacing. He told her which device was likely the initiator and which were the follow-on strikes, and where the triggerman would most likely be positioned based on line of sight to all 3 detonation points. She asked him how he knew this. He said he'd seen it before. She asked where. He said the same road. Different year. He said it differently that time. He said this setup had a signature that matched doctrine used by a specific network that had been operating in this region for at least 6 years, and that the EOD team needed to sweep the kilometer 19 area before any convoy used Route Vermont. Olmos called it in. EOD swept it. They found 2 of the 3. The third was close enough to the second that the controlled detonation took care of it. Nobody was hurt. Olmos came back to Marcus and stood in front of him for a moment with the expression of a person revising a category they had confidently established. She said there was no way a civilian logistics driver knew about network signatures and doctrine and complex ambush configurations. Marcus said she was right. She asked who he was. He said he was the convoy driver. She said that wasn't what she asked. He looked at her. He said he'd tell her what she needed to know. He told her he'd been in the Navy. He told her he'd been in for 15 years. He told her the work he'd done was the kind of work where the mission didn't get announced. He told her that the contractor badge was legitimate, and the driving job was the job he was there to do, and that he had reported the IED configuration because people were going to use that road, and he wasn't going to let people use a road he knew was wrong and not say something. Olmos processed this. She said nothing for 8 seconds, which was a long time to say nothing. Then she said she needed to update some paperwork and asked him to be at the 0200 brief on Thursday. He was there. The Wednesday between the IED find and the Thursday run was the kind of day that had no reason to be the worst day. Blue sky, cold in the morning, warm by noon. The mountains north of Kandahar looked clean against the light, the kind of day where the danger was harder to feel because the air felt too good to be dangerous. Marcus did his 0430 PT. He ate breakfast alone. He drank coffee and read the previous day's intelligence summary in the operations center because Olmos had quietly added his name to the distribution list, which was not a small thing, and which both of them understood was a communication in itself. The intelligence summary noted increased activity near kilometer markers 11 through 17 on Route Vermont. Nothing specific. Pattern of life suggesting vehicle movement at night. Possible pre-positioning. Marcus noted this. He ran his thumb across the bracelet. He thought about the 2 men whose names were on the inside face. He thought about the fact that they had died on a road that had seemed quiet. He thought about the fact that quiet roads had a different kind of danger. The danger of the lowered guard. He went to the motor pool at 1600 and walked Vehicle 1. He checked the hull. He checked the tires. He checked the comms suite. He talked to the armorer about the vehicle's M250 caliber mount and made sure the headspace and timing were correct and that the can was full. The armorer, a specialist named Bridges, watched him do this with the expression of a man watching a surgeon operate and realizing the surgeon was very much not the hospital administrator he'd been told was coming to tour the ward. Thursday began at 0130 with the brief. 4 vehicles, same route, Wolverine resupply. Olmos ran the brief, hit the intelligence updates, flagged the activity near kilometer 11 through 17, and told the drivers to push interval to 100 meters and maintain noise discipline and not bunch up near the identified stretch. Marcus sat in the back and listened and said nothing, and looked at the map overlay, and noted that the suspicious activity corridor ended at kilometer 17, but that the intelligence collection on kilometer 18 through 22 was sparse, meaning the absence of data was not the same as the absence of threat. He noted this to Olmos after the brief. She asked what he thought they should do. He said, push through kilometer 11 to 22 at speed. Don't slow down. Don't bunch. If something happens in the flagged corridor, the reactions needed to be clean and immediate, and the vehicles needed separation to have room to move. She said she'd briefed that already. He said he knew. He said he was just making sure. She looked at him the way she'd been looking at him since Tuesday, with a recalibrated attention that was still sorting itself out. They rolled at 03:47 in the morning, which was 33 minutes later than planned because one of the HMMWVs in the trail position had a hydraulic issue that took 20 minutes to diagnose and 13 minutes to address well enough to roll. Marcus sat in the cab of Vehicle 1 with Doucette in the turret and watched the clock and noted that the 33-minute delay meant they would hit kilometer 11 as the pre-dawn sky was beginning to show its first grey suggestion in the east, which was different light than the plan had assumed. Different light meant different shadows. Different shadows meant different threat visibility. He rolled and said nothing about this because there was nothing useful to say about it. The road out of Kandahar was empty. The first 10 kilometers went without incident. The mountains to the north were beginning to separate from the sky in the gathering pre-dawn. The road surface was cold and dry. Marcus ran Vehicle 1 at 63 kilometers per hour and kept his eyes moving and his hands loose on the wheel and his right hand near, but not on the radio. Kilometer 11 arrived. He had a feeling that was not quite a feeling, more like a physiological response to accumulated information. Something in the specific texture of the silence, something in the way the road shoulders sat, the way the culverts were angled. He had felt this before. He had felt it in Helmand. He had felt it in Mosul. He had felt it in a place he didn't name to himself. He keyed the radio and told the convoy to push speed to 70 and hold it. Esteves in Vehicle 2 acknowledged. The vehicle behind Esteves acknowledged. The trail vehicle acknowledged. Marcus pushed to 70. Kilometer 12. Kilometer 13. The device at kilometer 14 was not where any of them had been looking. It was mid-road, pressure plate buried under patched asphalt. The patch was 11 months old based on coloration, which meant it had been placed in a previous season and maintained since, which meant this was a long-term emplacement by a patient network, the kind of network that watched route patterns for months before acting. The right front tire of Vehicle 1 hit the plate at 04:12 in the morning. The explosion came up through the floor like a fist. The MRAP's V-shaped hull did what it was designed to do, which was deflect the blast outward rather than inward. The vehicle rose. Marcus felt the lift, which lasted less time than it takes to read the word lift, and then the vehicle came down hard on the right side and slid 6 meters and stopped. His ears were gone, not completely, but functionally. The world became a pressure and a ringing and a high, bright sensory distortion that combat veterans describe as the moment before you know whether you're okay. He was still in the seat. His hands were still on the wheel, which was not the wheel anymore. The wheel had moved. He assessed himself from the bottom up. Feet, present, working, legs, present, working, left hand. The bracelet was there. The bracelet was warm. He registered this. Torso. Something in his left side that he recognized as a rib problem, which would hurt later, was not going to stop him now. Right arm. Working. Head. He had a cut above his right eye from something, and blood was coming down in the way blood does when it has the runway of the forehead, fast and dramatic, and in this case not serious. He looked up through the cab. Doucette. The turret had moved. The hatches had buckled outward from the overpressure. Doucette was not responding. Marcus moved. He unbuckled. He climbed. His left side was already telling him what a rib felt like when it was unhappy, and he registered this information and put it in the category of things that mattered later. He got to Doucette. The young specialist was unconscious and hanging in the turret harness and had blood coming from his nose and from a laceration across his scalp. Alive. Marcus put 2 fingers on Doucette's carotid and felt the pulse, which was present and not terribly weak. He keyed the radio with his left hand and gave the contact report. Vehicle 1 was disabled. They were at kilometer 14. He gave the grid. He told vehicles 2, 3, and 4 to hold their positions. He told them not to advance. He told them there could be secondary devices. Olmos was on the net in under 4 seconds. She asked for status. He gave it. Himself, walking wounded. Doucette, unconscious but with a pulse. Probable traumatic brain injury. Secure in turret harness. Vehicle disabled. He needed a dismount team to provide security from the high ground at the right shoulder while he pulled Doucette clear. She told him she was coming up with 2 soldiers from Vehicle 2. He told her to approach from the left side of the road only, and to step exactly where he stepped, and not vary from that line, because he had not swept the right shoulder and was not confident it was clean. There was a pause on the radio. She said, "Understood." She came up the left side with 2 soldiers, Alvarado and a staff sergeant named Kim, moving fast but controlled. Marcus had already dropped from the vehicle and was positioned at the rear of the MRAP in a way that covered the road to the north with his M4A1, which he had retrieved from the cab while assessing Doucette. His left side was doing things that would have put a less prepared person on the ground. His face had blood on it from the forehead cut, and he had not wiped it because his hands were occupied. Olmos reached the vehicle and looked at him. She had seen combat before. She had not seen this specific thing before, which was a person she had categorized as a convoy driver, standing in the aftermath of an IED strike with a weapon in a proper firing stance, and blood on his face, and a look in his eyes that was not fear and was not bravado, and was something that had no easy name, the look of a person who has been in exactly this configuration before and knows what comes next. She asked what she needed to do. He told her to take the north sector. He told Alvarado to take the east. He told Kim to help him with Doucette. Kim was trained as a combat lifesaver. Between the 2 of them, they worked Doucette out of the turret harness. Marcus handled Doucette's weight with his right arm while Kim took the legs. Marcus's left side was providing a running commentary that he was actively not listening to. They got Doucette down and onto the road surface. Kim started the assessment. Marcus moved back to his sector. The radio traffic was building. The QRF back at Kandahar was spinning up. The EOD team was 15 minutes out. An Apache from the CAB was en route. Marcus had given the grid and the initial assessment, and now his job was the 400 meters of road in either direction and the high ground to the right that he still didn't have eyes on. He told Olmos he needed someone to get eyes on the elevated ground at the right shoulder, 300 meters north. She asked why. He said that if this was a complex ambush configuration, the triggerman and possibly a secondary strike team would be in that position. She asked how confident he was. He said 70%. He said 30% it was a single device, and they were done. He said the 70% was worth addressing. She sent Alvarado and Kim north along the left shoulder with instructions to identify but not engage. They came back 3 minutes later. 2 men on the high ground. They had been there. They were gone now. Recent sign. Tracks in the loose rock heading northwest. Marcus took this information and put it in the column of things that had almost happened, but didn't. He had been in that column before. He was still standing, which meant he was on the right side of the ledger. Doucette was breathing. Olmos and her soldiers were accounted for. The Apache arrived 8 minutes after that. It swept the high ground and the roads to the northwest. It found tracks, but no personnel. The secondary team had moved fast, which meant they were familiar with the terrain, which meant this was not their first time on this particular stretch of ground. EOD came and swept forward a Vehicle 1 and confirmed no secondary device in the immediate area. They worked methodically, the way EOD worked, without hurry, and with the particular calmness of people who had made a professional accommodation with the possibility of catastrophic failure. The QRF arrived 22 minutes after the strike. Doucette was conscious by then. Concussive but present. He had looked at Marcus from the road surface, where Kim had him lying still, and said something that Marcus heard partially through his damaged hearing, and which amounted to the observation that Marcus was bleeding pretty significantly from his face. Marcus told him to hold still. Doucette held still. A medevac Black Hawk took Doucette and 3 other soldiers with minor injuries back to the Roll 3 at Kandahar. Marcus declined evacuation. The flight medic looked at his left side and told him 2 ribs were almost certainly fractured, and that he was an idiot for not saying something sooner. Marcus said he was aware. The medic applied compression wrap and told him if he felt any difficulty breathing, he needed to report it immediately, because fractured ribs could move, and the thing ribs moved into was the lung. Marcus said he understood. He sat against the blown MRAP as the sun finally came over the mountains and painted everything gold and orange and honest. The cold was leaving the air. The road stretched in both directions like a problem with no clean solution. In the distance, Kandahar was a collection of low shapes and radio towers, and the permanent haze of a city that had been through too many versions of itself. His thumb found the bracelet, the names on the inside face. He held it there for a while. Olmos came and sat beside him on the road. Not close. The respectful distance of 2 people who did not know each other well enough for close. She said she was putting in a report, and she needed to know what to put in the report. He said she could write what she saw. She said she needed more than that. She said what she saw was a convoy driver who had responded to an IED strike with the kind of tactical coordination and medical knowledge and weapons handling that didn't come from driving trucks. She said she needed to understand who she was writing about. He was quiet for a moment. He told her he had been a Navy SEAL for 15 years. He told her he had done 6 deployments in theater. He told her he had requested this assignment because after 3 years away from it, he had found that the distance hadn't helped the way he'd expected it to help. And working in a support role in the same geography, where he'd lost people, had seemed like a way to be useful without being what he'd been before. She asked why he hadn't disclosed this when he arrived. He said because the job didn't require it. He said he was there to drive convoys, and he was going to drive convoys, and his past wasn't operational information. She said it was when it meant her soldiers were working next to someone with a capability they didn't know about. He conceded this. He said she was right. She sat with that for a moment. She asked about the IED detection on Tuesday, the complex ambush configuration. She asked if he'd seen that specific setup in the region before. He said yes. He said the network that used that setup had been active in this corridor since at least 2014. He said he had personal experience with that network that he preferred not to detail, but that the signature was distinctive and he had been certain of the identification. She asked if there was anything else about the current threat environment that she should know that he hadn't told her. He thought about this honestly. He said he had noted in the intelligence summary a pattern that suggested a shift in emplacement doctrine toward older, well-maintained devices on routes that had not had strikes in more than 6 months, the theory being that infrequent use created complacency, and complacency created vulnerability. He said Kilometer 14 fit that pattern. He said the routes that hadn't been hit in the longest time were the ones he'd be watching. She listened to all of this. She said she was going to call the contracting firm and request that his assignment be extended, and that his role be formally acknowledged as a force protection advisor rather than a logistics support specialist. He said he'd think about it. She said that wasn't a request. He almost smiled. It was a small movement at the corner of his mouth that people who knew him would have recognized, and most people who looked at him wouldn't have caught. The bracelet was warm in the sun now. The names on the inside face. He thought about them in the way he usually thought about them, directly, without flinching, with the specific kind of grief that doesn't diminish, and that you learn to carry rather than put down. He thought about why he was still on this road after everything of the road had cost him. He thought about Doucette, 22 years old, flying back to the Roll 3 with a concussion and a story he would tell for years, and a life he still had because the MRAP had done its job. He thought about Olmos and Alvarado and Kim and Esteves and Park and all the soldiers who drove Route Vermont and didn't know its histories or its signatures or what the road was capable of on a quiet morning. He thought that knowing the road was worth something. He got up off the ground. His left side made its objections clearly. He got up anyway. He walked to what was left of Vehicle 1 and stood looking at it. The hull had survived the blast in the way it was designed to survive. The vehicle was done. The people inside were not. That was the math that mattered. Bridges, the armorer who had watched him check the M2 with the eyes of a man revising a category, came up next to him and stood there looking at the vehicle. Bridges said it held. Marcus said it held. They stood there for a moment in the growing warmth of the Afghan morning, two men looking at the evidence of something that had almost been worse and wasn't, which was a kind of gratitude that didn't always have words attached to it. Marcus spent 4 more months on Route Vermont. His assignment was extended twice, first at Olmos's formal request, and then at the request of the battalion commander, who had been briefed and who understood the value of what he had in his logistics rotation in a way that Bautista had not when he'd assigned Marcus to Vehicle 1 6 weeks before the strike. His role changed only slightly in the official documentation. It changed considerably in practice. He worked with the intelligence officer on route analysis. He briefed the convoy commanders on pattern recognition. He drove lead vehicle when he drove, which was still often, because he was the best at it, and because there was something about the act of driving that particular road that still felt like something he needed to do. Doucette came back to the unit 3 weeks after the strike. He had a slight headache that would stay with him for another 2 months, and a story that he told only once, in full, to Alvarado, who listened without interrupting. The story was about what he had seen when he came conscious on the road and looked up and seen Marcus standing in position, covering the northern sector, with blood on his face and a 1,000-meter focus in his eyes, and the look of a man who had been in this exact configuration before and was going to handle it the same way he'd handled it then. Alvarado asked what it looked like. Doucette said it looked like competence. He said it was the scariest and the most reassuring thing he'd ever seen at the same time. He said it looked like somebody who knew exactly where he was. Marcus left Afghanistan for the last time on a Tuesday in June. He flew commercial from Kandahar to Dubai to London to Houston. He sat in the middle seat on the last leg, which he didn't prefer, and looked out the window at the Gulf of Mexico as the plane descended, and thought about the bracelet on his left wrist and the names on the inside face, and the road behind him, and the road ahead. He drove from Houston to Beaumont on the highway that ran through the industrial coast, the refinery lights orange against the Texas night, the air thick and chemical and specific to this particular stretch of ground. He had grown up breathing this air. He had left it and come back to it more times than he could count, and it always smelled the same, and it always meant the same thing, which was that he was somewhere he'd started from. His father was waiting up. The man was 68 years old and had the hands of someone who had worked with them for a long time, and the eyes of someone who had been watching the door since his son called from Dubai. They sat at the kitchen table. His father made coffee that tasted like coffee, because that was how his father made coffee, carefully, the way he did most things. They sat with the coffee and the quiet for a while. His father asked how it went. Marcus said it went. His father nodded. He had been in enough conversations with enough veterans to know that this was a full answer. They sat there in the kitchen in Beaumont, with the refinery lights going orange and purple in the window, and the old house settling around them. And Marcus ran his thumb across the inside face of the bracelet and felt the names and thought about the road and the men and the mission and the blast that had come up through the floor like a fist and the vehicle that had held. The bracelet was warm. It was always warm. Consider what Marcus Teller's story says about the people you pass every day without knowing their history. The man who drives the truck, the woman behind the counter, the quiet one in the back of the room who says very little and does very much when it matters. We spend a lot of time building categories for people from the surface evidence, the badge they carry, the title on the paperwork, the role they've been assigned in the current chapter of a story that has many more chapters than you've been shown. Marcus never hid what he was. He didn't broadcast it either. He was doing a job, the job in front of him, with the full weight of everything he'd earned, and everything he'd lost, and everything he still carried. He wasn't performing humility. He was practicing it in the actual sense, the sense where you measure your worth by what you do with what you have in the moment you're in, not by the resume you could produce if someone pushed. The MRAP held because it was designed to hold. But MRAPs don't drive themselves into the right position on a road. They don't read culverts or flag anomalies, or understand the doctrine of networks that have been working the same corridor for a decade. The reason Vehicle 1's right front tire hit the plate at an angle that the hull could survive, rather than the angle that would have told a different story, is a reason with a name and a history and a bracelet on his left wrist. Doucette came home. Olmos went on to command. Alvarado finished his enlistment and started college on the GOI bill, and still thinks about the morning on the road when he was told to approach from the left side only, and to step exactly where the bleeding man in front of him stepped. What happened on Route Vermont at 0412 on a Thursday morning was not a miracle. It was the result of 15 years of training and 6 deployments, and the kind of attention to detail that becomes automatic when the cost of missing a detail is measured in the weight you carry afterward. Marcus Teller was nobody you'd notice at a glance. That was the whole point. Before you go, real talk for a second. If this one landed the way I think it did, take a moment and tell me in the comments what you would have done differently as the convoy commander when Marcus first reported that IED configuration on Tuesday. Would you have called it in? Would you have waited for better confirmation? Because that decision right there is where this story turns. Olmos trusted the information because the information was precise, and the man giving it to her knew things that the paperwork couldn't account for. The discipline of listening to competence, even when you can't verify its source, is a harder skill than it sounds. If you appreciate stories like this one, the ones about the people who show up and do the work without the credit, hit subscribe. More of these coming. And if there's someone in your life you've been underestimating because their surface doesn't show the depth, maybe today's the day to find out who they actually are. The quiet ones are often the ones who've seen the most.